Hello everyone, Sena here. On today's episode, we're gonna be implementing a fixed camera to our game. So right now, if we compile our game, we can see that our player moves, but the camera doesn't follow the player, so the player can just leave the area that we have designed here. So, but we want to implement on this episode is just that our player is always at the center of the screen unless we are on a limit of the map. So let's say this is the limit of the map. So we wouldn't want to move the camera because if we kept our player in the center, we would see outside of the map. So let's start by creating two new files. The first one is going to be camera.c, and then, oh, let me just click here. Okay, camera.c, and then we're gonna have camera.h. So camera.h, perfect. Now that we have this, just take this off. Let me zoom in a bit. So the first thing that we're going to do here in our header file, as always, do pragma once. And yeah, we also will need to include our entities.h because we're going to create a new entity called camera. And then we will also need to include player.h. We will be using that later. And so I think that's all the imports we need. So now we want to define a new type. I'm gonna call this type camera. Perfect. And then here inside of this type, we want to have four fields. The first one is going to, all of them are going to be floats. So we can just go float x, y. And then we want w and h. So the width and the height of our camera. What else do we need here? Yeah, we also want to make this camera extern. So it's available to other files that imported. And we want to also make this function available too. So perfect. I think this is all we need for our header. We can just come into our C file again and just include it. Include camera.h. And we want to make a function, void init camera. And we don't need any of this. So what are we going to do here in our init camera? So the first thing we need to do is create an entity. So I'm gonna call our entity camera. And we are only going to have an update function because our camera is not going to render anything to the screen. Just want to update every frame, and then we will update our player and map based on whatever this is. So after that, create entity. Oh, yeah, we have here the semicolon. Perfect. We need to define the update function. So let's do that. Remember static void update. And here we would define our everything that we need to do on our update function. The thing is that we need some variables from our player to be able to update our camera because it's going to be based on our player position. So to do that, first let's go into our player.c and get those values that we need. So you remember we had this position variable that dictates where our player is in the map. And what we're going to do is make this position variable external. We are gonna change the name too because position is not really descriptive. Better just say player position. So we know this is a player position. And we can just change all the occurrences where this happens. Perfect. Here too. And as you can see here, we already had player position in our render function. So what we're going to do is change the name to player rect instead. Just take this and paste it here. Great. And yeah, we said that we need this as an external function. Sorry, an external variable. So we're going to go into our player.h. And since we are at that already, we can take that type definition and put it here. There's no reason for it to be on our C file. And we're gonna define another type too. Type def, oh, sorry. Yeah, we were doing, let's go one thing at a time. We make our position extern, so it's available to any other file that includes the header file. And we want to define a new type. This new type, I'm gonna explain in a second what it is. Sprite size. As you may guess from the name, this is going to be the size of our sprite. And so let's go back to our player.c, and here we're gonna define a new variable called sprite size of type sprite size. Sorry, sprite size sprite equals 1518. This is what I was using. So this would be whatever number you have here. This way, instead of having it hard-coded in this instead of this rect, we can have it as a global variable. Perfect. So let's change it here. Instead, sprite size width and sprite size age, not width. Perfect. Great. What else we need here? Yeah, here we need to change this. So let's just start by making this a little bit better organized. Perfect. And what we're going to need here is a new variable. We can call it final x, because this is going to be the actual position where our player is going to get drawn. So to get this variable value, we need our camera. So let's go back to our player.h, come here, include camera.h. And now if we go back to our player.c, you will see that now we have our camera available. We just say camera.x. Yeah, perfect. That works. So what we want here is the width of the camera, and we want to divide it by 2. And then we want to subtract from that the size of our sprite divided by 2 again. And we don't need any of this. So why are we doing this? This is centering our camera. So we're getting the half of, if we do like the final y2, we're in the middle of our camera, and then we're doing this to center our player. So the way I'm gonna explain it with this. So the way it works is, right now this is the center, and our player gets drawn from the center. So everything gets drawn from top left corner. So when we draw our player with only camera W divided by 2, our player would get drawn here. And so what we want is that our player gets drawn in the actual center of the screen. So to do that, we just take half of its width and half of its height, and we just subtract that. And that way, when we do that, as you can see, our player gets center into the screen. So that's the reason we have this here. Okay, perfect. Now we need to do 2 more things. This would get our position if the player is not on a boundary of our map, but or our camera. So what happens when our player is in a boundary? We don't want the camera to follow our player and keep it centered. We want the player to be able to move freely when it's on a border. So to do that, we're just gonna define 2 if statements, 4 if statements. The first one is going to be if camera X is less or equal than 0, and we're just going to do it in line and need to open the brackets. Final X, it's going to equal the player position X minus this sprite size with size width divided by 2. We're just getting the player position, and we are subtracting half of its width from that, because if we didn't do this, then the player would snap when going from not being on a border to being on a border. So that's why we are including this, to keep it consistent. And then we would do the same for the Y. And this would work for our top, our left border and top border. But we need to define our bottom border and right border. And it's a little bit different. So the way it works is, let me type it and then I'm gonna try to explain how it works. So we would do camera out.x plus camera width is, I don't think that's what we wanted. Let me just delete everything. Okay. So if camera x and camera width, if we add those two things, if it's bigger than, this is an arbitrary number for me, but this should be the size of your map. So if your map is 700 pixels wide, we want to put here 700 pixels. In my case, my map is, I think, is a little bit bigger, but we're gonna keep it smaller and closer to the size of our screen, just so we don't have to scroll too much to reach the border. So if camera x plus camera width is bigger than our map boundary, we want to say final x, final x equals our player position x, minus the size of the boundary, in my case 420, minus the camera width, and then we want to subtract the sprite size width too. So that's why are we doing this. So in the case that we are on the right border, in this case, what we want to do is that our final x is our player position, but we need to subtract the border and the camera width. And then we also need to do this of readjusting the player position, so it doesn't snap when we change from a border and not being on a border. And then for the y is the same thing, just we change the x for y and the width for height. Then we have the 4 boundaries. And now instead of drawing to our player position, we want to draw to our final x. This is where we want our player to get drawn. Perfect. We don't need to change the sprite size or the sprite width or height. And yeah, that's about it on our player.c. But we need to do some things on our camera, because here we didn't make anything on our update function because we needed our player.h to be complete. So now that we have changed our player, we can come here into our camera.c and start making everything work. So first thing is that we need to define the camera here. So you'll see I'm gonna say, yeah, 0, 0. This is the position, the initial position of the camera. And then this is the width and the height of the camera. And you may ask, how do I know what's the width and the height of my camera? So if you go into your init.c, you remember we had this set render logical presentation, which is basically making our game be this size, and then it gets rescaled, so whatever resolution we're playing on. So in reality, our game is just 320 by 180. So whatever the number is here, these two are your width and height for your camera. So in my case, would be 320 by 180. So now that we've defined that, we can just go into our update function. And here we want to update our camera every frame. So how do we do that? We want to change camera X, so it equals the player position X minus the camera. Yeah, so this is correct. What are we doing here? We're just taking the screen size, dividing it by 2, and then our player position. We're subtracting that to our player position. That way we get where our camera should be on this frame. The same thing for camera Y. And then we need to apply the same principles that we did to our player. So limiting our camera to with certain boundaries. So in this case, it's easier because we can just say if camera is equal or less than 0, we say that camera is 0. Indeed, we can just have if camera is below 0, we make it 0, because if it's 0, then we don't need to reassign it to 0. So if camera is less than 0, we want the camera to go back to 0. This is because of what I said. If we have our map that covers from 0, 0 to 400 to 40, we don't want our player to be able to see outside of those boundaries, because we would be seeing outside of our map. So nothing, just a black background from the SDL window. So now that we have this, we have defined the boundaries for the left and top borders. We want to do the same for the bottom and right borders. So the way we do that is, yeah, I think this is the correct answer. Yeah. So if our camera X plus our camera width is more than our boundary, which I don't know if let me see in our player.c how much I put here. Yeah, I want to have a lesser value. So say 240 set. Okay, and same here. These are just made up values for demonstration, because I want to be able to reach the borders quickly so you can see the effect. But in your case, as I said, this is the size of your map. So this would be the width and this would be the height. So what are we doing here? It's almost the same as we did in our player.c. So we just add these two things up, and then if it's bigger than our boundary, we want to make our camera X be the subtraction of our camera width from that boundary. And then the same for the Y position. Perfect. Okay, right now we're almost done, I think. We have created our entity, or our camera entity, but we haven't included it into our init.c. So let's do that too. So we can just go into init.h first and include camera camera.h. Now that we have camera.h, we can use the function init camera. Perfect. Great. And you may think that everything should be working now. So we can try to compile our game and see what happens when we run it. Our player is up there. We move. And we are quite broken. Right now I'm pressing AD and it works, but WS don't work. Like, why is this happening? What's going on? So the thing here is that we don't we need to update our camera and our player, but we also need to update our map. So the map has to move with our player. So how do we do that? We just simply have to come here into our map.h first, include our camera.c, sorry, .h, and then in our map.c, it's super easy. We just need to subtract the camera.x from the destination rect. If you remember, this is the source rect. Where do we get the texture? From our tileset, and then we have the destination rect. This is where it's going to get drawn. So what we do is just subtract where this is getting drawn, the camera X, and we do the same for the camera Y. And now if we try to compile our game again, if I move, everything works fine for now, and voila, seems like our camera is working. My player is at the center of the screen, as long as we are outside of a boundary. The moment I hit this left boundary, you see, it stops being centered, and I can move freely because we are on a border and we don't want to see anything else outside of this because it's black. So we can just move. As you can see, it works fine for left, top, bottom, and if we go to the right, perfect. It stops here, even though my map is bigger than that, because as I said, I limited the border to 420. If I wanted this to work properly, I would have to make it the same size or the same width as my map. So now that we have that, I think we're just doing pretty fine. The next episode, we may be implementing the animations for our player, or maybe we add collisions, because right now, as you can see, I can just go through fences, like terrain, houses. So something like that, it's probably the thing that we're going to be checking.